And let's go ahead and jump in with talking about calculating a change ROI. All right, great. So, well, maybe not great. What did I do? Oh, that's not right. How did I get to the end? We haven't even started. All right, that's way better. Welcome. That makes more sense. All right, everyone. Well, welcome. Talking about calculating a change ROI. I'm Ed Cook, and with me is Roxanne Brown, and we're going to be guiding you through our thoughts around really these three areas. So, how to make this connection into business case and really what the value of a business case is. Then we'll get into metrics and starting to talk about measuring change, and in particular, measuring the ROI associated with change. And then we want to finish with this notion around telling the story. So how do we actually put together a persuasive presentation about what is really going on with a ROI calculation for change? And so we'll break this up into these three sections. So let's start with the business case. And we want to talk a little bit about how they're used and then how we want to plug into the business case with the change work that we're going to be doing here. So the big thing around the business case is it for real or is it really just a fantasy? And you can hear things on both sides. Organizations that talk about business case as this locked in analytical thing that they have, and others that will talk about it all just being a fantasy and everything goes out the window the next day. What I think might be more useful way to think about it is really as a prediction. So it's really the best understanding that the organization has at the time about any particular initiative. And because of that, because it's at the time, we would suggest that organizations should constantly be looking to updating it. So because new information will come in or the circumstances themselves will actually change. And so remaining fixed to the original is really more a measure of how good are you at predicting the future, not a measure of what kind of value are you really going to deliver. And so we would think about it in terms of a continual update. That'll be important as we start to think about what's going on with an ROI calculation that we would have around change. So if you look at what is typically in a business case, we usually see these four areas. So there's a summary section that gives the overview, a problem statement. So what is the thing that you're trying to solve? And then the largest section tends to be this analysis piece that's in the middle, which goes through the history and the details of the problem and an understanding of what value could come if you were to find a solution. And then lastly, the alternatives are laid out and then the solution suggested. So we're going to want to zoom in on the C section here, which is really where the analysis is. And that's where we're going to go grab the information that we need in order to be able to start down the path of putting together a great change ROI. And we want to do that by linking in to first the idea of what a business case is. So in our view, business case is just a justification for a proposed initiative. And it's going to be based on the expected benefit, and it must be updated, that's important, as new information arrives to be a valid measure of success. So as an example, the company now goes through a merger in the middle of this initiative. Well, the business case may be out the window. So all kinds of things could have changed as a result of that. And sticking with it, potentially to the detriment of actually understanding what's going on with the effort, seems foolish, right? So we want to update the business case based on this information and link it to this idea around what is change management. And all of you guys know this because this is the definition out of the standard that ACMP published really still just a handful of years ago, back in 2014. So the practice of applying a structured approach to the transition an organization from its current state to a future state to achieve expected benefits. And we're tying into this expected benefits idea, right? We're trying to understand what the value of those expected benefits are going to be. In particular, what is the value that the change effort is going to have to get those expected benefits? And we often refer to that as a return on investment or an ROI. So let's talk about how we're going to go get that. So how are we actually going to go make our ROI calculation? It's one thing to understand it conceptually. It's another thing to actually put it in a spreadsheet and start calculating it. And so that's what we want to talk about here. And so let's go right to it and talk about what our suggested approach should be. So this is the equation that we would suggest that you start with. There's some modifications, additions that we'll want to make, but let's start with this conceptual idea first. We're going to look at the business case value, in particular the part that's attributable to people. We're going to calculate the probability of success if we don't have a change management initiative, and then subtract out whatever the costs are going to be that we would apply because of our change management work. And then whatever is left over from that, well, that's the return that you get. And many organizations use a percentage approach to that. So we could take the exact same components, rearrange them, and turn it into a ratio, which now gives you a percentage return on investment by dividing what the value is by the cost that's associated with going to get the value. They're functionally the same. This is exactly the same stuff. I'm just rearranging the terms, a little bit of algebra in order to create a ratio and think about it that way as a percentage. So either way is fine. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about like what's actually in each of those three important components. So let's start with first with the business case value. The part of the business case that we need to pay attention to is the value that is attributable to people. So there may be components in the business case that don't have a direct people component, meaning people don't need to act differently in order to get the value from the business case. And we shouldn't include those as part of a change ROI because the change management work isn't impacting that. So for an example, if you're going to get a discount on a software license, or you're getting a reduction in rent from buildings as a result of the change initiative, and it doesn't matter the behavior of the people, doesn't impact it, well, then that should come out, right? Because a hardcore analyst is going to point to that and go, okay, well, your change initiative, your efforts don't have anything to do with that. So you can't count that as part of the ROI. It fits as part of the ROI for the entire initiative, but not for the change effort that's there. If you don't have a business case, I know that unfortunately happens to you guys, all of us, more often than we would wish it would. You still could go for a qualitative approach by looking at other initiatives and just making a comparison to this one. So looking back at a successful initiative, what value did it achieve? And then make a comparison to the one that you're doing here. Is the one you're doing here bigger or smaller? Is it twice as big, half as small? Kind of work your way into it. And that really needs to come from whoever the executive sponsor is that's responsible from it. Because you want to get that from that person, not you deliver that number, because then that puts it in question. Whereas if it comes from the person who says, yeah, this is the value of the thing I have responsibility for, well, now it's not you, it's coming from them and you're using their number. The probability of success is just wrapped around the likelihood of adoption. And a good measure, one that we like to use, even thinking about change management in general, is if you can whip off an email and tell everybody, hey, go do this, and they would just go do it, then you don't need a change management effort. But if you kick out that email and there are crickets, or only a very small percentage of the people are going to do anything as a result of that, well, now you need change management, because whatever's going on is more complicated that can be handled than just a simple email. And using that example has been pretty powerful just with executives that we've worked with. When they go, why do I need to do this thing? I'm like, okay, well, type up your email right now and send it, and will everybody do it? Well, no, of course they won't. Well, there you go. That's why you need a change management initiative, because it's not as simple as just kicking it out the door and saying, please go do this thing. One of the ways to get maybe a little tighter on that is to think about not necessarily likelihood, because that can be kind of hard to do, but even a percentage of the group. So if there's 1,000 people and we just send an email notification saying, hey, do the new thing, and 20% of them will do it and 80% will not, well, then that's the number that we want you to use. We want you to use that 20% in order to figure out what the ROI is going to be. That can be conceptually easier way for people to wrap their brains around it. Whereas like going for a likelihood measure, I don't even know how to think about that. That can be hard to do. Now, others that are used to it, they may go straight to it. So don't give it up. Go give up on that one. That can still be a good way to go. And then lastly, the cost of the change management initiative would be the third factor that's in there. And you want to be as complete as possible, right? So you want to include all the different elements in there, because the more all in it is, the more credible it's going to be, especially to some analyst who's looking through and counting all these different pieces. And we want this calculation to be so robust that any analyst that sees it will go, yep, that's right. I mean, that's it. You covered everything. There's no reason to doubt any of the factors that are here. So that's great, but why don't we use an example? And so it can be helpful to think about this more specifically. So we're going to imagine that we have a company called Leadership Skyward, and they are an aviation experience company. And what they do is they take executives on 2 and 3 day experiences where they talk about communication and decision making as it's done by pilots in the cockpit, and use that as a way to advance the skills that these executives have around those 2 areas. Their hook is that they take the executives flying. And so they have to actually go do this in an unusual and uncomfortable situation for themselves so that they can go back to being a new learner and work on a new skill in that environment. So there's a change that's coming at Leadership Skyward. And what's going on is that the company CEO has listened to the sales department, which has talked about the need for a customer resource management system. So as you might imagine, it's a small company. They grow up and they're doing things on paper and then on spreadsheets, and the sales team is telling them, we're beyond that now. It's time for us to get a new CRM so that we're able to do things in a better way. So that's what they're going to be up to in this initiative. So let's walk through this example, and I'll kind of guide you through piece by piece. I know there's a lot of data in here, but we're going to see it here, and then I'm also going to show it to you in an Excel spreadsheet because I want to give you a little technique to use that's very easy to do in Excel that will make this calculation even more robust and bulletproof. All right, so let's go through the pieces here. So first we'll start with the business case value. So let's go and we'll assume that there's these 3 components in here, and there's a licensing cost that's in there, but there's improvements that are expected in outreach to new sales inquiries and even the ability to close the sale. Well, the first one is going to happen when they put the new system in. So it's either you either get it or you don't. It all happens as a result of doing it. It doesn't matter what the behavior is of the sales team, but the second 2 definitely matter, right? So if they don't use the system as intended, you're not getting that business value. And so we're only going to use those 2 pieces. We can't include the 1.5 million because that's not people dependent. So we're going to have a 4.4 million total business case value that we want to pay attention to. The next component, as we go down now on the bottom left, is look at the probability of the change success. And that really needs to come from the executive sponsor, right? So how do they think about it? And you can use the email example that we had. And let's say that you are the change professional that's helping the CEO out, and you ask the CEO this question: how many people are going to just jump in and adopt? And in this case, we're going to assume 70%. And I know that those of you that have done any sort of an implementation like this automatically know that 70% is a ridiculously high number, because no one's going to put in a new complicated system like that and all of a sudden 70% of the people are just going to use it without doing anything. But what I want to show you is that even with a value that is that high, we're still going to end up with a positive ROI. So just go with it, if you would, and we'll walk our way through the rest of this. So we're going to assume 70% of the people are going to do it on their own. So 30% will not, unless we do some sort of a change management initiative. And then lastly, we're going to look at all the costs of change management. Now I'm giving a bunch of examples in here of things to think about, but salary of the change management person, or if you're hiring a consultant, whatever they're charging you, project managers, other stakeholders that are engaged, meetings, events, materials that you buy, posters you put up, whatever it is, all the different things that you might use in this endeavor, and add them all up and be as exhaustive as you can, because there's going to be somebody looking over your shoulder counting all those up. And so if you can be the one to say, yep, I got it all in here, everything's accounted for. Now, when you go to do your calculation, so coming back to our equation, if we look at the business case value that we're going to use, 4.4 million. And then we're going to have 1 minus the number of people that are just going to adopt. So if 70% are going to adopt, 30% is the number that we want to pay attention to. That's why we're subtracting it from 1. And then we take out all the costs. And if we get a positive value, any positive value, we now have a positive, worthwhile ROI, meaning that if we didn't do the change work, we don't get that value, but 430,000 just goes away. And so this is an opportunity to grab that value and be able to bring it in, because you wouldn't get it otherwise. And you're working on getting the executive to understand that before you go into this calculation.
So we have a question from Bhairav. Sometimes the ROI is based upon the cost of not changing versus the benefits of change itself. What would you suggest doing differently in those cases?
Yeah, so I guess probably you're still looking at there's still a value number in there. So if the value is associated with not changing, then there's still a number, right? So there's some value that's associated with that. And if not changing, if what you mean by that is people aren't doing something else that you do not want them to do, so maybe flip all these and make them negative, essentially. I want people to continue to do this. I don't want them to change and do this other thing. Then you still, I think, can use a calculation that way. So an example that comes to mind, because we keep talking about this with other people, is I'm a CEO and I don't want people to leave my company. I'm thinking of it in terms of retention. And so the behavior I want them to stay and continue to be engaged and be productive, and I don't want them to go. Well, you can still look at that business case value just in that segment. I know it's more complicated because you can get into all these other people I have to hire and the recruiting costs. I'm keeping it just to this piece. The folks leave, I, as a result of that, lose some business value. If I keep them, they don't do the thing that I don't want them to do, then I get to keep that value. I can still make all of the same calculations and still come out with a ROI as a result of that. So I hope that answers it for you. All right, but this is, and as Parag just pointed out, this is incomplete, right? There are other elements that are in here. And so I don't want to, skip through this and go super simple, 3 pieces, do the calculation, you're good. The one that's probably the biggest and maybe the most glaring that I'm sure most of you, all of you are probably looking at is like, hey, the value doesn't only come from the people that are doing the change work, right? There are project managers involved, and there are IT people that are implementing the CRM, and there's all these other people that are engaged. That's true. So some of this ROI is going to come from them, and we're going to need to pay attention to that. So we want to try and take a global view of this as well. So we've kind of zoomed in on just the change piece of this. We want to zoom back out and look at the entire initiative and make sure that as a result of adding in the cost of doing the change management, we haven't pushed the entire thing negative. And so what I'm looking at now is all the way up at the top. I want to look at everything that's going on in this business case, still take out the costs of doing the change management, also take out now all of the other costs. So now I'm just looking at, am I still going to capture some positive ROI as a result of this? Or have I turned this whole thing into a big science project and I have a business case that returns $10 and I'm suggesting a change management effort of $1 million? Okay, well, that's going to be negative, right? You're never, ever going to get over that. So that's really what we're checking for here, is to make sure we haven't added in so much cost that we can't stand it. So if we were thinking about this example and just continue it, let's say the rest of the cost is still 2.1 million. If I add up all those costs and I subtract them from the business case value, I still get this big giant ROI, right? So you can see where this would happen, right? So if the ROI is really, really narrow, or you have relatively little, then yeah, adding on the change management is potentially going to push it negative. But if you're that much of a sliver of actual value, you might want to reconsider whether or not you actually need to do this thing. Now, the other part of that is there can be other considerations in here besides monetizing everything. Maybe there's a regulatory issue, like you just have to do it because some regulator is going to turn your company off and shut you down. You don't do the thing that you need to do. Well, you could go through some process and try and monetize that and bring it back in. I would say that's more effort than it's worth, because if you have to do it in order to continue the existence of the organization, then you need to go do it. If you can do that and still return some sort of a positive business value at all, well, even better, right? So if you have a thin, narrow slice, then maybe those kinds of risks would actually be the ones that you would pay attention to and continue to move forward on the effort, even with all of that.
So Janice asks about, seems like you took out the 30%.
Yeah, I did, Janice, because now that doesn't matter now. Now at the upper end, at the broad global view, I'm just worried about how much value do I get in total, and then how much are all of the costs now? Because now I'm just looking to make sure the whole initiative as a complete value package is still positive. When I looked at it initially, I just want to see, is there value that I get from doing the change initiative? And so I'm isolating that by looking at only the people that are not going to adopt unless I go do something. But I also want to check and make sure that I didn't add a whole bunch of other junk in there as a result of that and now push the entire initiative negative. So that's why I'm thinking about it in those two ways. And I think that is going to be a pretty robust way to describe it to any analyst that's going to look at this. The two pitfalls that people typically get is, well, you narrowed in on just a piece of this and you can't isolate that, which is what we did at the beginning. But at least that shows that there's some value to go get. And so we fix it by looking at it globally. And then the other problem is to look at, well, you're looking at it globally, but we would have gotten all that value anyway. And that's why we zoom in on the first one. So I think you do really need both. You have to look at it from both lenses in order to be able to take out what is going to be the concern that folks would have about why does it make sense to do this. You really can apply the same idea in other areas as well. I mean, it's a useful way to look at it. Is this component going to be helpful to my overall initiative? But I think it certainly applies in this change example. All right, so now I want to get into how do we tell the story about what's going on here. And I want to first give you something to think about in terms of how to do that visually, and then something to think about in terms of how to do it analytically. So first, let's talk about the visual one. So one interesting, I think really useful way to do this from just a data visualization point of view is to use a waterfall chart. And you can make one of these in Excel. So it's straightforward enough to go do. And the way in which a waterfall chart works is you start at the left-hand side with whatever the value is. So if we say, in our case, we're going to return this $4.4 million in the business case. And now we start taking out, subtracting out the costs that come in. And so that lowers with each of these bars, the two red one and the yellow one. You see, I'm just simplifying this. So a couple components of overall application, some project managers, some people in technology, there's costs there. If we say there's costs in doing the change management in the yellow bar, then what we're left with is what's in that tan bar at the right. And so we're sort of stepping down like a waterfall as we go from the total value and then start taking the costs out, and we end up at the final net value. What does the organization actually get out of this when everything's done? That's what's in the tan bar. And that is a quick way for people to internalize what's going on with all this stuff and what's really coming out as a result of that. It's also a decent way to show the relative size of the effort that you might have around your change versus everything else that's going on. This is in what I would say is typical, certainly is what I've seen in my own experience, is that the change part of it is pretty small compared, in terms of money anyway, compared to all these other things going in. So for a relatively small cost, you can get a pretty big lift because putting the technology in itself isn't good enough, as you guys know, to go get people to actually do it. You got to go bring them through the process. You don't light up a system and say, go at it, usually, and have that work out just fine. So in this example, you get a quick way to get a relative difference between the different costs that are being associated with making this initiative happen, which helps tell the story about how this relatively small cost is going to have a big impact on what you're doing. All right, so this takes us to the analytical piece. And what I want to do is take you through a very simple sensitivity analysis. And this is something you can easily do in Excel. I'm going to show you. how to do that right now as we walk through. The value of this is that people might argue with, well, I don't believe your percentage number, or maybe some of that business case value doesn't actually show up and come from people. And they might argue the numbers for you. And going through the sensitivity analysis is a way to get in there and be able to take out some of that. And let me show you how. So I'm going to come out of my PowerPoint and stop sharing that. And I'm going to bring up an Excel example. Okay, so in my Excel example, I've basically redone all the numbers that we talked about. And that's what's over here in column B. So we see our three elements over here that we had before with our business case. And you can see that I'm only adding up the second two, the part that are attributable for sure to people, or at least in part. We know for sure the first one cannot be. It's a licensing cost, and we've already talked about that. So that's not coming into our calculation. We're putting in the value that we have for the change, right? So we have 70% in there is what we're using for that value. And then we're adding up all of the costs that we've got to make the change happen. And finally, our ROI equation gives us 430,000, exactly the same numbers that we had on the PowerPoint slides that I showed you before. But what do you do if somebody says, well, I don't believe you're 70%. I think the success might be something different. So you could just go in there and change it. And then somebody else might offer another number, and you could go in and change that. And then, you just keep at it again and again, and you could do it, right? Excel will keep calculating it for you, and you can just write those numbers down or copy them over somewhere else in Excel, but that's tedious. And Excel's already set up to do that automatically for you. And the tool that's in Excel to do that is called a data table. And so I'm going to show you how to use a data table to understand how much can this percentage change and you still have a positive ROI. Similarly, if you have issues over here with the value around the total amount that's attributable to people, you can also step in with that value and make a change to that and talk about what the amount actually is going to be. So let me make a few adjustments and we can talk about that. All right, so I'm going to put a number in here, 0.8, and say that 80%. We don't believe this entire value. We're saying only 80% of it is potentially there. And so that means I've got to multiply this sum by that 80% so that I'm lowering the value. So I multiply it by that cell. And now instead of the 4.4 million that I had before, I now have 3.52 million. Okay, and again, I can just keep changing these numbers, but that's super tedious. Instead, as you can see over here, and I've already set this up just to make this go a little faster, I'm going to create a table. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the success percentage. And you can see from here from 20% all the way to 100%. So I think that the amount of success I'm going to have will only be 20% if I send out an email to 100% if I send out an email. And then I'm going to look at the amount attributable to people, and I'm looking at that from as low as 50% to as high as 90%. If you want, you could do the whole range, right? You could go from 0 to 100 if you want to make a big giant table. I'm just making it a little smaller, so hopefully it shows up better on your screen and you can see, and in terms of setting it up, it doesn't really matter. All right, so I want to set it up in this format. So you can see I have this column here and then this row here. And what I'm going to make Excel do is put in the value in here. So for example, in this cell, Excel is going to return a value to me when I set this up, saying if the success percentage was 20%, and if the percentage that's actually attributable to people is 50%, then what is this ROI equation value that's down here? So that's what I want it to return for me. And I'm going to do it across all of these. So the way I do that is to set up this data table. And so the first thing I want to do in this cell that's in this corner here, I want to look at the thing that I want to keep changing, or that I want to see the output of, and that's the ROI. So I'm going to make it equal that cell. So that's this cell down here, B18. So you can see up in there, I have that as B18. And so I'm going to get that value in the cell. Whatever's down here, I'm going to get up here. And so now I highlight all of this. So I make a nice little box. And then I'm going to go to the data tab. I'm going to go over to the what if analysis. And then you can see right here down the data table. And that's where the data table functionality lives in Excel. So data tab, what if analysis, and then select the data table. And when I do that, what pops up is this little dialog box. And what it wants to know is what are the things that go in the rows and what are the things that go in the columns. So in the columns, we've got this success percentage. So I just want to tell it, this is the value we're going to change, the success percentage, which is in B8. And so I put that in there. And then it wants to know what's going on in the row input. And that's the percentage that's attributable to people and a percentage. And so I'm going to do C6 because that's where I put that value. And so I'm going to ask Excel basically to keep changing those values according to the ones that I put in here. And when I do that, it now populates and puts in all the values that I would have gotten if I had changed them in here out of my ROI equation. Instead, gives me a whole table. And just to make this look a little nicer, I'm going to format it. So if I highlight it and right click and then go to format the cells, I'm going to turn them all into currency. I'm going to get rid of the pennies because I don't care about that. And I'm going to make the negative ones red because that'll make them pop a little more. And so now I get a little bit of a heat map view. So, and not surprisingly, like if the success percentage goes up, so at 100%, that means that everybody's going to do it without change management. So yeah, it's going to start turning the number, making it look bad because I added all this cost in, but I didn't get any value out because I was getting that value anyway. And you can also see that as the success per attributable people is higher and as the success percentage goes down, well, those numbers get bigger and bigger because more of the value comes from people, and the likelihood that they're going to do it without some change management is very low. And so you're going to get worse and worse numbers as a result of that. And so that's a quick way to get in there and be able to show that. And what it does for an analyst looking at it who says, I don't believe you, you could say, well, look, here's where it is good and here's where it isn't. You're not saying, no matter what, give me the money, it's all going to be great, I'll do awesomeness for you. You're saying it happens in this range. So if you believe that this is the range, then I can do something for you. If you don't believe that that's the range, then I can't help you. So maybe that's an appropriate way to go. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing here and take us back to our PowerPoint. I just have a couple other things I want to share with you, and then I would love to hear questions. All right, so that's a sensitivity analysis. And where the term comes from is the idea, how sensitive is the output value based on what the inputs are. So I'm changing the inputs, how much are associated with people and how much is attributable to people, and checking to see how does my answer change as a result of that. So all of this has really been focused in on what happens to actually do the work, make the project happen. But what Roxanne and I have been doing is thinking about how we can do this and impact the culture. And the impact that we're looking at, and we talk, and you can see it on all our slides, is this idea of joy at work. So we're trying to do the change effort to not only get the thing done, but also to improve the culture. And so we've been doing interviews with executives and are continuing to do that around research to understand what drives joy at work and how an effort, change effort in particular, can either contribute to that or detract from that. And so when we say joy at work, we mean this. Joy at work is about creating the conditions that help people thrive in their work, especially in times of change. And in particular, what that means is joy at work is the employee's willingness to participate, commit, be accountable, trust, belong, and act with cohesion, adapt and grow, demonstrate respect, and act with integrity. And we're very specific about those 10 dimensions. Those are the ones that keep showing up, and we are diving in more and more to understand those. Joy at work exists when the company leaders and managers continually create the conditions that extend the invitation for employees to contribute in this way. So there's something the organization has to do, but you can see there's a second part. The employees have to constantly accept that invitation. And so in doing the change work, and thinking in particular about the return that you get from that. I will call it the mechanical piece that we just went through. Do we achieve the business case or not? But the other part to bring in there is, what are you doing to the culture? So how is this relevant to doing change work? Well, your approach is going to directly impact the culture, and it's going to have those lasting effects. I'm sure you guys have participated in efforts where it was successful, but people felt broken and beat up and bruised by it. You know, folks talking about the dead bodies left in the wake of this initiative, even if it achieved every single thing that you put into the business case. So we talk about change management often in terms of processes and tools and templates, which is great because that makes it tangible and real for leaders. I was on the receiving end of that when I was leading large organizations. So knowing there's a thing to do and that you are able to calculate a return on investment for me is important. I want to know that. But even better, if you are able to now help drive my team so that we are growing joy at work, so that the next initiative that comes along is going to be even stronger, so much the better for that. So I mentioned this a little bit as we're going through. Roxanne and I set up these different classes. What we're talking about here is squarely in the middle of our change analytics concentration. And this is something that we've now been doing for almost a year now, and have delivered this class multiple times. And it's wrapped around, how do you know if you're getting anywhere with your change initiative? So what are the tools that you can put in place to not only measure the initiative, but also measure how you are impacting joy at work? And you can see some of the things that we dive into here. We've set this class up now so that it is evergreen. So we've got recorded content, tools that are available for people, and we're doing cycles of live sessions, which are really a entire business case, simulation that we're going through, and using all those tools to actually see how this stuff works. So our next one is coming up here shortly, and so we'd love to have you guys jump in and take a look at that if you're interested. We've also got a couple of presentations. So Roxanne just did one through ACMP 2 days ago about change and joy. So we went into this joy concept in much more depth, and those are recorded, so you can go onto the ACMP site to check those out.
Yeah, and it was really fun. Got some great questions from people. It was awesome.
And with that, we're also been building, as you can see here, to ACMP's virtual conference, which is coming up now in a month. We have a master class that we're doing around change analytics, and we also have a recorded session that's out there as well. There's a bunch of others, like 21 live sessions and another 20, 30 recorded sessions in there, other master classes besides the ones that we're doing. There's a bunch of value to be had in this. So go check out the acmpglobal.org site if you want to go see what is happening there. But we'll be there. And so if you guys are going, we hope to be able to see you there virtually as we're doing now. And there's a couple other things. So we recently completed this. This is available for free on our website. So the best team experience report. This is the compilation of all of these interviews that we've been doing for much longer now, years now, with various teams, and what we learned from them. And we put it all together in a report. You can pull that for free off of our website and be able to engage with that. And we've also recently put out our guide to joy at work, which is available on Amazon. We're super proud of ourselves for publishing a book on Amazon. So it's an ebook, so you can go and check that out as well. But please stay in touch, and there's lots of different ways to go do that with Roxanne and I. You can check us out on our website, and we're publishing on Medium. You can see those here, and pretty often on our blog as well. And with that, I'll just say thank you, and I would be very interested to hear what else you guys are thinking. So if you'd like to put that in the chat, or you just want to come off mute, this is, I mean, we call this a webinar, but it's, as you can see, a Zoom meeting. So if you just want to pop off of mute and ask your question, we'd love to hear that as well.
So just FYI, I put the link to the best team report in the chat if you want to go directly to it. It's in a simple booklet kind of format, meaning it'll flip like a book, but you can also download it. So this is a question we got before the webinar. Do you want to take a look at this?
Yeah.
See?
So the question we got before, calculating the ROI means that there is an understanding of the cost of change management.
Yeah.
How do you quantify the CM resources and budget to match the change initiative? CM is scalable, so how do you forecast required resources? Well, so the first thing I would say on the first part of the question, I would count everything. And I know that might be in some ways overcounting, because there can be people or events that are doing more than just taking on the change management. But again, if your contribution to change management is so thin that even counting those little bits is going to push this over into a negative margin, then you probably aren't going to be able to pass muster with an analyst who's going to say, well, there's too much uncertainty in here. A slight change is going to push it over. However, if you include all those, and some knucklehead analyst is going through and they can't find anything else that's in there, then that's going to just make that all the more certain and more robust. In terms of the scalability piece, that's a great question. That applies to everything, right? So IT resources are going to have to scale. Project management resources are going to have to scale. The way that I would think about it is I would look at the components that are there, but for the most part, change management is going to scale based on the number of people that you're impacting. And so if you know what that number is, or if you know what the effort is for a particular number, let's say it's 1,000 people, here's how much change effort I need. If you now go from 1,000 to 2,000, what else do you have to add? I mean, you can basically come up with your equation based off of that. There's a bunch of costs in there that are fixed. You are fixed, right? Whether you show up and you're doing the work or you don't, you're either in or you're out. You want to look at the other efforts that are going to be associated with it. And that could be communication resources, number of people needed to do the training, those kinds of things that could possibly scale. But I would actually go figure it out. Look at what I think my likely target group is, and then should it increase or decrease? What's the impact going to be to my change plan? And then how does my cost alter as a result of that? All right, folks, other questions? Anything else you want to throw in the chat or come off mute and let us know what you're thinking? All right.
Quiet today.
Hopefully people are feeling good with all that. I hope all of that was valuable for folks and give you something to think about. If you do have other questions you want to ask, please send us an email. I'm happy to talk about any of that stuff. We love all this, love talking about these things. So happy to engage with you guys on that. And if you have thoughts on anything else, especially around change analytics, I really wish I knew how to, I'd love to know that as well, because Roxanne and I have been working on these things, trying to figure out what do we need to build out that's going to be useful for people to have and be able to do a better job understanding the impact that their change work is having and be able to show that, quantify it, show it. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Glad you guys came and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Roxanne.
Thank you, Ed and Roxanne.
Thanks, Austin.
See you soon.